Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live stream and Q&A. Hopefully you're all having a great Tuesday once again. Again, I'm not home. I'll be back next week, so I am in the makeshift little setup here. But we're going to still be running down the same exact show as always. We're going to be taking your guys' questions, your comments, your theories, anything you'd like to discuss for about an hour and a half this week. As always, Super Chat's best way to guarantee you are on the stream tonight. Those always get bumped up to the top. You can also join our Patreon and YouTube membership programs. If you are of the $5 tier or higher, you get priority chat access. What does that mean? That means if you are on YouTube memberships, you should already see the icon to give you that chance to send your priority chats in free of charge, or on top of what you're already paying with the membership. And then with Patreon, we don't know your YouTube handle, so you can either send us your YouTube handle and then we will prioritize your chats in the chat room, or you can send in your questions or your comments on the comment section of the post on Patreon. Again, you will only see the post on Patreon if you are of that tier or higher. So those are the ways you can send in priority chats. Otherwise, it is going to be first come, first serve as always. Try to mix up, get a little bit of everybody's questions in here, try to get through as many as possible across the night. It is another slower Star Wars news week, as it's been really since Andor's ended. But we do have a couple interesting stories to talk about, I guess kind of coinciding with some of our stuff we've been putting on the channel recently with our wrapped up Outlaws. I wanted to call it Andor, but Outlaws coverage, which has concluded now with our final Let's Play of the last DLC. And Ubisoft's had some not necessarily nice things to say about Star Wars in the wake of the failure of Outlaws in terms of at least finances. You can debate on whether you think it's a good game or not, but financially it has not been the success they were hoping for a major AAA Star Wars game, especially our first AAA open world Star Wars game. So we're going to talk about that. We have a variety of other smaller topics to get through as well, including Tony Gilroy reacting to the Emmy nominations and the snubs that were there that we talked about last week with Diego Luna not getting a nomination, as well as all the other acting snubs. They didn't get any acting nominations besides Forrest Whitaker for his cameo role and guest appearance as Saw Gerrera. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But as always, this is a stream dedicated to your guys' questions, your comments, anything you would like to ask. We already have a chat room full of questions lined up, so we're going to keep getting to as many as possible throughout the night. It's going to be about an hour and a half show, maybe a little bit longer, depending on the flow of the questions. So keep firing those in. But let's start off with liking the video. More people are watching right now than have liked the video. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you are new. If you're finding us on replay, make sure you join us every Tuesday night. It doesn't always look like this. We have a much more professional looking setup, for at least for me, usually, but I'm on vacation right now. So I've got my last couple days here, and then I'll be back home, and it will be business as usual from the normal setup there into the future. So if you're new, subscribe, join us, and ask your questions every week. We try to get as many people on as possible. All right, let's start with the first topic here tonight, and it's going to be the Ubisoft topic, which has really the Star Wars Outlaws entire saga here has been a kind of an interesting one to follow. I mean, we go from Outlaws being our first ever AAA Star Wars game and like the excitement around that original announcement to kind of eventually Ubisoft's string of really underwhelming titles that have come out, especially in their already pre-established franchises. And even if you want to include Assassin's Creed, I know Shadows did pretty well this year, but Assassin's Creed's kind of been floundering over the last few years as well. And so we had this kind of lull into Outlaws, and then Outlaws kind of was not necessarily what a lot of people were hoping for when it came to a big, huge Star Wars, open world game. But they were planning on all the support. We got the Lando DLC, we got the Hondo DLC, and now we are pretty much done with Outlaws content. This is pretty much it. And Ubisoft CEO Yves Guillemot, I don't know, I hope I said that right, has commented on the sales underperforming of last year's Star Wars Outlaws. During a meeting, a shareholder meeting, he was asked if the game's less than desired revenue meant Ubisoft would market or price future games differently. He said He predictably had an answer ready, but it was a little bit dubious. He said, "We couldn't reach our sales targets, and the game suffered from a number of items. First, it suffered from the fact that it was released at a time when the brand that it belonged to was a bit of a was on a bit of choppy waters." And that was his biggest statement towards Star Wars. He later said the game had a few items that still needed to be polished, so he does acknowledge that the game wasn't really that great at launch. They were polished and debugged in the early weeks after release, but it did affect sales volumes. We did heavily improve the game by troubleshooting and debugging, and when it will be released on upcoming consoles such as Switch 2, it will have a new version, and improvements of the game are not yet finished. So that's kind of what he said. I mean, if you want to just read what he said, it sounds like no big deal, but really, he's blaming Star Wars for the fact that the game didn't sell well. So we can talk about this in a variety of different ways. Obviously, there's been hundreds of Star Wars video games out there, and not too many of them have underwhelmed in terms of like being this big of a budgeted big title and underwhelmed the way Outlaws has. So you, I think, could look internally and say, well, maybe that's not just a problem with the Star Wars brand, but even as Star Wars fans, we talk a lot about on the channel how the trust has been broken a little bit between the fans and Star Wars. This has been, like he says, choppy waters for Star Wars. People haven't been unanimously in love with something Star Wars outside of Andor in a very long time. Does that play a little bit of a role, you think, Sonic? Or do you think he's really just stretching here to really just kind of save Ubisoft from really the blame that they should be shouldering for the failure of Outlaws?
I'm gonna have to go with the second. I don't truly believe what he's saying actually has a lot of substance, honestly, because frankly, I can get the arguments that like, the Star Wars brand has not had the same reputation, there's a disconnect with fans. Those are all things you can argue and debate about. That's totally fair. Except for when it comes to gaming, like proper gaming, right? Like, we're not talking about, like, Star Wars Hunters, which had its own huge issues, and recently, the Zynga CEO had a bit of a conversation about that. I think you guys can check out, like, Eckhart's Ladder, he did a great video on that, kinda just breaking down his thoughts on it and the discussions from the CEO there, but that was a game that was delayed for, like, 2, almost 3 years, right? And it was trying to be a MOBA, but for a mobile app, and from Zynga of old game studios, that's not really done games like that. The final product there was actually not bad, but he brought up an interesting point of saying, like, most people when they wanna play games on their phone, they're not really looking to, like, be immersed. They're not really looking to have, like, high sensitivity and touch and attention there, right? Basically saying, yeah, those kinda spammy games like Clash of Clans and stuff, that's what people are going for, right? And I think that has a much stronger argument than whatever the Ubisoft CEO is seeing here, because we have seen it recently, just 2 years ago, Jedi Survivor, and then a couple years before that, Jedi Fallen Order. Like, those are games that have been well received. Star Wars Squadrons, even though it was a smaller game that was priced at, like $20 less than the usual Star Wars game, very well polished. It was a game that, if anything, people were like, "Man, I wish there was more time with." EA obviously has had issues, with their work with DICE on Battlefront 1 and 2. 2 especially had all that loot box controversy, but by the time of its cancellation of sorts, by the end of 2019, early 2020, that is when the game had almost, like, peaked again, and we've seen for the last couple months, like, you'll see on random videos and stuff, bring back Battlefront 3. If there is anything under the Star Wars brand that has, like, almost had a lot of love for it and has only been asking for more quantity, like, quality is, always gonna be something we want for sure, especially with how LucasArts and Lucas Games used to be pioneers back in the '90s for a lot of, like, PC gaming and all that. Obviously, there's that reputation upkeep, but we've been begging, like, Disney, like, "Hey, we need more Star Wars games." We're not necessarily wanting to have, like, the whole prequel era's, like, deluge that George Lucas really pushed out there, like, merchandising and gaming everywhere, right? Like, that might be a little too obscene, which is how long it takes to make a AAA games these days. But there is clearly a better place to be than, where we are now, where we're finally kinda pushing into this world of, like, different studios actually being able to embrace the brand and do something with it, right? And it's not like, "Oh, like, this is a problem that's been there since 2015," because you can't even make that argument because, frankly, the EA 10-year exclusivity deal limited everything from ever being in this position now. So yeah, you can say, oh, the brand has been damaged, movies, game, blah blah blah. No, not games. Definitely not games. You've had an open opportunity. People are excited every time these games come out. Yeah, there'll always be people online that'll hate, like, a female character lead and all that, but that's doesn't really change the fact that Ubisoft has had this reputation well before Star Wars of, like, they make really cool open world games that are very grindy and almost incomplete mechanics, right? This has always been a thing. Like, it's a meme to say, like, a Ubisoft open world game is gonna be a solid 6 to 7 out of 10. Nothing more, nothing less. They'll do just enough to entice you and then be like, "Oh, am I really gonna stay here?" Like, it's not a developer that's had great success with even their flagship brand in recent years. I know Assassin's Creed Shadow had a pretty strong start after all, like, the online discourse and everything, but after that, you barely heard anything else about the game, right? This is not just something affecting the Star Wars brand. This is them having to kinda look back at themselves and be like, "Whoa, is it us? Could we be the baddies? Could we be the villains here?" And it is, right? They just don't wanna admit that. I mean, people are very excited for that new game, Zero Company, that's gonna be coming out, an RTS, the first one in a long time, right? And I'm sure it's gonna perform more like a Squadrons more than anything, just because that is a little bit more tactical. It's not very action gamey like something like Outlaws and Battlefront can be. But it's like, dude, like, come on, right? And you yourself are admitting that they had to do a lot of debugging, that it's not even done yet for next gen consoles when that's gonna be updated and touch stuff. It's like, great. And yeah, Liam was right. It did coincide with me actually finally getting back on Ubisoft Plus for like a month and a half and then finishing up those 2 walkthroughs of both of the DLCs and just some of the game mechanics that had changed. Like, if that was there from the start, immediately would have been a much more immersive game. Being able to climb up a ladder and stowing away your gun, being able to, like, have it on you for a while, just aiming mechanics, stealth, everything was so much smoother, so much better. I just personally choose to run in and bumble around because I just wanted to finish the DLCs, but the times that I was actually playing the game, I was like, "Yeah, this is a lot more polished. This is a lot nicer." And even if they are fairly short 4-hour, 5-hour, like, missions of sorts, I found both of the DLCs even more enjoyable than large swaths of the base game, right? So it's not like this wasn't achievable by any means. If they had just gotten the mechanics fixed from the start, if they didn't have like some stuff like the Jabba's Gambit mission, which I also played, and you're like, is this really a season pass exclusive? Like to be hidden behind there? Yeah, I mean, if those things had just been cleaned up, I'm not saying it would have been a massive improvement in like how much their sales would have been, but there would have been a lot more trust being like, okay, at a foundational level, the game is good. It just needs more updates, more content, more story pass stuff, right? It's not like we're asking for huge, huge shifts, right? We're just asking like get the baseline right. If you're gonna get that stuff that is standardized 10 years ago in the very early days of open world games, and it's not here in a Star Wars first real attempt at open world, you can't blame Star Wars. You can only blame yourself, especially if you're a pioneer of the whole open world game concept. So I really think that it's just someone just trying to cover up for themselves, right? If this game was marketed for $10 less with these problems, you would have gotten even more sales. They were just small things you had to push and pull, just get right at the start, delay if you needed to. And I know it's the
Yeah.
holiday window. People really want to be excited for it. Okay, great. But then you launched well before it. So I didn't understand that
Yeah.
strategy either, right? Like what you it seems like they were kinda putting it out there to die, and they're like, "Oh, no, it died." It's like, "No, that's kinda your own fault." People actually were pretty down for ND5, for KVS, for a lot of the story that we got in the DLC and all that, like, people actually enjoyed it. They found it super immersive. I know Liam and I both did. It's just we both wanted it to be foundationally stronger because 'cause we've seen open world games for so long now that you can't slack off on just the base concept of what it is.
But yeah, and that's where I was gonna go too. Is it just like it makes no sense why they would put it out in the time they did. First of all, just if you believe in your big AAA Star Wars game, why put it out in August? August
Yeah.
is a time when nothing comes out, video game wise, movies, no entertainment comes out because kids are going back to school. Like the only thing you'll see, and it really dominates the video game window, is Madden. Madden comes out in August, and that's kind of it. And
Yeah.
that's like that's a time for it's a video game graveyard almost more than any other month. I mean, maybe January might be the only other time, but it doesn't make sense why you put it out there. I mean, the only reason they were doing so is what we speculated back then when it came out was they were trying to maybe get ahead of that Christmas hype so that they could capitalize on sales before Black Friday and then get to Black Friday and then discount it and try to get some more sales there. And they were going to slowly improve the game. So hopefully word of mouth was good enough by Black Friday that they could get a lot of people to buy it then, right before Christmas. But it makes no sense. Why would you release your game in an unfinished state when it already had an uphill climb? I mean, if really you felt the Star Wars brand was choppy waters and not strong enough to carry your game alone, then you really should have delayed it and made sure it was a great game so that even those people who aren't trusting of the Star Wars brand right now are like, I still got to check that out because it's pretty great. Because Jedi Fallen Order experienced the exact same trials and tribulations. Survivor experienced the exact same trials and tribulations. And both of them did very, very well because they were great games. And I think Fallen Order even more so. We hadn't had a Star Wars single player game in forever.
Yeah.
And at that time, not only was Star Wars' reception mixed due to the sequels and like the division around the sequels, but you also had a really mixed opinion on Star Wars EA video games, and people still gave Fallen Order a chance because it was a Game of the Year nominee. Everybody loved it. Everybody said it was so amazing. And so it showed in the sales. So that's, I mean, we say this about movies all the time, and it's the same thing goes for video games. It goes for any type of media. In today's world, we're all too connected. Everybody knows, everybody can have an opinion about a game or a book or a comic book or a movie or TV show. You can't half-ass your product, because if you half-ass your product, then everybody knows about it. Like, it becomes a meme. It becomes a joke online. It becomes people see 7 out of 10s and 6 out of 10s everywhere within the week of the game coming out. Like, it's just, you can't avoid that. You can't like sneak it there and hope that people eventually come to it. Like those days back in 2010 when you could release a game semi unfinished and put out a patch in the next first month, and then it gets better because only certain people are playing it on launch. A lot of people are waiting. Now everybody's just made up their mind, and there's so many games coming out and they're so expensive that people are saving their money for the ones they really want. And if Outlaws frankly didn't look great from the trailers, it had underwhelmed in the trailers, and then you put out a game and it just confirms everybody's suspicions that, yeah, it's like a 6 or 7 out of 10. I'll wait for a sale. That's kind of what they did. They shot themselves in the foot. And I was going through Ubisoft's last 10 years of video games, really. And I mean, this is why we can't get anything great from Ubisoft anymore with comments like this, is because the last thing they've made that has been an open world game and consensusly, critically, and financially successful was Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and that came out in 2019. I don't think any game since then has been both a commercial smash and a critical smash. There have been games that people have liked, like Far Cry 6, but haven't been incredible successes critically. Games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla or Assassin's Creed Shadows, pretty good games critically, but not necessarily 9s or 10s out of 10. And in video game world, you need that 9 or those 9s and those 10s to really compete with the top games of the year. So from a company that really established the open world genre, they haven't really been able to do much with it. I mean, Watch Dogs 2 was a huge step over Watch Dogs 1. Then they released Watch Dogs Legion, which everybody's forgotten about, So like, that's kind of just been the thing with Ubisoft. It's just forgettable title after forgettable title. And the titles that they have made that have been fairly successful and critically acclaimed have been the more experimental things they've done. It's been the Prince of Persia Lost Crown, I believe it was called, Mario Rabbids. It's been like those things that they don't necessarily have as much investment in. They just let the developers develop and create a good game. They have more investment in something. They really don't have the titles to show for it. And so they've had some underrated games over the years. Like Avatar was kind of underrated. Most people agreed about that, but it did not sell well, and it was not a critical smash. It was still like a 7 or 8 out of 10. I think if this game didn't have the Star Wars title on it and it sold underperformed like this, and then people picked it up 6 months later, they're like, oh, this is pretty decent. Like, this would appear on hidden gems of this generation. But because it's a Star Wars game, everybody's expecting more, and you underdeliver. and you're coming off of Skull and Bones, which was all one of their huge failures, right? I think that was also the crippling thing for them, was everybody was so disappointed by that as well. So it's not shocking that they're saying this, because this kind of been their company strategy for a long time. But I don't think Star Wars is the reason. Does Star Wars Choppy Waters not help the game? Absolutely, it does. It's not a step forward. There are still those people, and we interact with them every day on our channel, and everybody interacts with them if you're in the Star Wars space online, who are just like, I'm not touching anything made under Disney's reign of Star Wars, which just means they're not going to touch anything Star Wars ever again, because Disney's not going to give up Star Wars anytime soon. Those people, sure, will boycott the game until they hear otherwise, that it's a 9 or 10 out of 10. So Star Wars is in that place, and I've said this so many times about the shows and films, but Star Wars is in that place to where you need everything to be really good to great. So it's like undeniable that almost everybody who doesn't like it is either, you know, is just a person who doesn't like it and they have a fair opinion, or considered, in that radical group of people who hate everything. And so you kind of they need to make more content like that. And Survivor and Fallen Order were there, and Outlaws is definitely a step back from that. So, what do you guys think about the Ubisoft comments? What do you think about Star Wars Outlaws? I have not played it since probably September, so kind of want to give it another shot here. So I don't know if I want to pay for the DLC. I really don't, and I have it on console, so I don't know if I can sign up for Ubisoft Plus or not. I got to check into that. But I don't really have much interest in returning to it outside of playing the DLC, but I've heard the combat and everything is much better. I got like 15, 20 hours in, and that was enough for me. But what are your guys' thoughts? Maybe some of you have been playing it over the last year and you think like, yeah, you really should dive back in. It's so much better. We do have some comments from people on this specific topic. Brandon Tran said, do you think Star Wars Outlaws deserves another continuation like a spin-off Disney Plus show, even though not too many people bought the game? Definitely not a Disney Plus show. Does it deserve a sequel game? I wouldn't say deserve, but I think you could make. I think the bones here, we said this in our review last year, the bones here are foundationally solid. It's just not, they didn't go above and beyond. Everything is just as basic as possible. So if they could take the bones of this game, especially the updated bones where they fixed a lot of the like dumb things that the game does, like dropping weapons when you climb up a ladder, like they fixed a lot of that stuff. If you could take the bones of the version we have now and then add all the things that make an open world game great, then I think absolutely I would love to see an Outlaws 2. Would I prefer to see a different Star Wars open world game made by different people with different characters, and you maybe get to play as a Jedi or something like that, or like Boba Fett or the jetpack, something that's a little bit more accessible? Like, because I think Kay Vess in general was a difficult character to center an open world game around, because like in the Star Wars grounded world, what does she really have to build and customize and build out into this like fighting machine, right? When you're playing as a Jedi, you can add and unlock force powers, and you're playing as like a Mandalorian, you can upgrade your equipment and your tech and all this different stuff. She's just a person running around like Han Solo-esque. You can't really upgrade Han Solo in a game, right? So I always thought that was kind of a mistake for open world, because it pulls away one of the number one elements of open world games, which is the collecting element and finding things to upgrade your character. If nothing's really going to upgrade your character, then it kind of, that's a downside already. So personally, I'd rather just see an entirely new open world game if we can only have one open world game at a time. But I think everything there with Outlaws is solid enough to where if they actually gave it the facelift that it deserves, they could make a pretty killer second game if they wanted to. But I don't know. It sounds like the relationship between Star Wars and Ubisoft right now might be a little rockier than we all thought.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really spin off a game into a show unless it's acclaimed, right? And it's even when we're looking at Fallen Order and Survivor, I'm only expecting to see Cal and maybe Marin, right? And obviously BD just because he's there. He's a like a little dog essentially, right? And they've already had like the different BX models at Galaxy's Edge, so they clearly have some sort of interest in at least getting to that point of like showing that sort of character, that sort of droid character. And we know they're gonna show up also in The Mandalorian Grogu, so it's like we're already halfway there. But for something like Outlaws, which again underperformed sales-wise, had some really strange choices, but its mechanics, I mean, I can unfortunately report still that you are punching stormtroopers with your bare hands. You don't have anything like, you know, like vibro brass knuckles or anything that would, like, justify that, and I'm not saying this as like a, "Oh, it's a girl or something." No, I wouldn't like that if, like, any sort of character did that, right? That's one of my issues with the game. I was like, yeah, like, if you were, like, maybe targeting, like, the little gap in between the helmet and where the shoulder armor pauldrons start, like, as, like, a pressure point or something, that would make more sense, but the animation has no sense of making it seem like, "Oh, we're actually trying to, like, take down these enemies, put them to sleep or something." It's like, nope, you're just clobbering them, right? And I say this as someone that genuinely did enjoy my time with the game coming back. I also had some apprehension with time off, came back, and I was like, "Yeah, no, I remember how much I loved the immersion, and the story was pretty good." I liked a lot of the Lando stuff, right? The Hondo stuff is just great. Just the acting, obviously, it's just fantastic continuity with having the same voice actor, Jim Cummings and all that, but yeah, story-wise, is it anything incredible? No, it's not, and Kay definitely needs to grow as a character. I don't think putting her in a show where you essentially have to reintroduce her to a whole new audience is gonna work that way. At least with Cal, it's yes, it's also a mocap performance with Cameron, but the difference is it's so good and it's long, right? The story is long over 2 games, and we're gonna have a 3rd game, so by the time he ever shows up, you can be like, "Yeah, okay, we finished his whole entire arc that was there of his youth," and then if he shows up in the New Republic era, or if he shows up much older in, like, the New Jedi Order era, it's like a new character again. Kay Vess, it's like, you haven't had enough changes with her, for me as a character at least, that I'd be like, "Oh, yeah, no, I'm excited to see her in live action and see the same sort of characterization again." No. No, I don't think that'll work, and yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate to say, but I think what's most likely gonna happen is comic book and, book appearances. I don't hate it, right? I think Cake is a fun character. I think ND is a great, companion to have along the ride. Having a reformed commando droid is still one of the coolest things, especially with his trench coat. He's just constantly aura farming. He's such a cool character. But even the game does a lot of heavy lifting with K and not so much with ND. Like, there's a lot that the DLC I was surprised to see, like, oh, there is a lot of stuff. It's like they really are stepping into that partnership that's only really solidified by the end of the base game. I'm like, "Man, one more DLC and maybe we could get something even more cool, even more sincere to that very obvious pairing that's there in marketing, but not really in the game itself." I think regardless of what happens, Kay's next appearance, she has to become a little bit more not wizened per se, but mature, a little bit more grizzled. Like, she is very much playing it off as a Han Solo, but the inexperience, even in the DLC, like, it's an intentional choice, right? She gets away with it so far, right? Because 'Cause she's got the skills, if not necessarily the suaveness behind it. But if she shows up, like we talked about in a very old stream, like a couple years into New Republic era where everything is kind of open, like, it's perfect for the underworld to kind of make alliances with the fledgling New Republic or with, the Proto Shadow Council and everything going on post-Battle Jakku. That is a space where she can thrive because she has so many different contacts in the underworld, right? And if we get to see a little bit more continuation of Kira, then yeah, I'd love to see Kira and then KVS show up there as, like, a cool little cameo or something, but as, like, someone getting a show or, like, being a major supporting character in a show? Probably not. Um, Another sequel to this game, I wouldn't mind it, right? Like Liam said, the bones are there, right? Like, the bones of the gameplay and the bones of the story and the character. The next one will be very exciting, and it could be a great way to show how, like, the underworld ties into a lot of stuff that we see in Mandoverse happening politically and action-wise, but not necessarily, like, what are the politics of the era? How is the galaxy functioning, right? This is a great way to kinda give us that point of view that, the Thrawn trilogy, for example, does so well because they're really bartering with the underworld to from both the heroes and the villains side to really get footholds, to really change the status quo. You could have Kvesh show up not even necessarily be the main character, but, like, be a character that you have, like, a huge storyline with, like, as a new character, and I think that'd be a great place for her to continue, right? If we're not gonna get a Han Solo 2 or a Star Wars Story 2, there's just no real way of seeing this character jump into live action at this point, and I think Humberly did a great job with what she's given. I think she actually performs it quite well. It's just, is it enough for her to jump in there? No, right? And if we're not gonna get Cal Kestis anytime soon, by the looks of it, I really doubt it. So I would love a game, not necessarily with her as a lead, but if it is, great. Just make sure you're building out every single thing, like the ideas of like, different factions and like prestige going up and down with them. Build all that out. It can be great. If not, a supporting character for a whole new open world character in their story, but more than likely comics and books.
Yeah, exactly. And I just a show is so out of the question, I think, for something like this. But I agree, comics, books could be the place. I mean, we've seen the Jedi games get their own failed book, um, but it's a possibility. I just don't know if anybody's really that attached to these characters enough to plug them into multimedia. I think your best shot at continuing their story is really a second game. But if these comments are anything to be believed, I think Outlaws is kind of dead. Could be something that if it picks up a cult following in the next 5-6 years, by the time we get to the next console generation, maybe they revisit it. Maybe they say, hey, enough people really love this. We'll give it a second shot. But I don't know if this is that type of game. Like we have talked about those types of games that have redeemed themselves. I mean, Star Wars has their own with Battlefront 2, right? But most of the time, those types of games had something more to them. They were a little bit richer than what Outlaws is. Like if you want to talk about Cyberpunk, that was technically flawed, but when you got to play it, it was a very rich game. It had all the things they were promising. It had all the detail they were promising, all the interactivity and weapons and all that stuff that they were promising. It just didn't work. So then by the time it worked, like it was a pretty darn great game. And then now it's considered one of the best games of the generation. No Man's Sky is another one a lot of people throw out. Again, that was something that was wholly unique. Like that concept was wholly unique. And so by the time they were able to perfect that concept, it was still something wholly unique out there. Star Wars Outlaws, the only thing they have going for it that's unique is that it's a Star Wars open world game, but it's a dime a dozen open world game, right? So it really just there. I don't see it really having those legs. I don't see the player base coming back to it enough. Will it be that type of game that maybe when people are saying hidden gems of the PS5, Xbox Series generation, maybe Star Wars Outlaws pops up on some of those lists because it's not a bad game. It's just not a great game or even a very good game. It's just the middle of the road. And that's why I think I gave it a 6 out of 10 when we reviewed it before. And I kind of hold still to that. I mean, it's probably gotten a little bit better technically, which I was docking it for technical points back then as well. So maybe it's a 7-ish, but it's a game that you really don't remember. I forget about it every time until we talk about it again on the show. And that's really just not ideal in today's world. In order to make a lot of money in the video game space, these studios want you to be playing the game over and over and over again. And there's not much replayability, nor is there that much excitement around this game. So I just don't see it ever finding those legs. Could it get a second life in terms of people's opinions? Sure, but it's not going to ever have a second life in terms of playership. But what do you guys think? Wrapping up these comments here on Star Wars Outlaws before we move into your guys' questions. And we have a lot more people watching right now than have liked the video. So make sure you like the stream. Really helps us out. It's one of the best ways you can show your support for our channel, and subscribe if you're new. We do this every single week on Star Wars Lads, taking your guys' questions, your comments, all of that good stuff. Scrolling down to more questions or comments about Outlaws, we have Skywalker's Academy says, we all know that it's the Ubisoft perfection of historical gaming successes. If you want to save face, maybe you should just shut it. I mean, I'm with you, Skywalker's Academy. They are trying to appeal to their stockholders, but I think most people who are plugged into the gaming space whatsoever know that this is a bunch of malarkey. I mean, Star Wars is an easy target. You can absolutely blame Star Wars. If you're not plugged into the gaming space, there are some people that just be like, yeah, that's true. Star Wars sucks right now. But if anybody knows anything about Ubisoft, it's hard to believe that Star Wars is the problem with their games.
Yeah, I mean, do people forget about, like, Assassin's Creed Unity? Like, the memes that
Yeah.
came out of, like, literally the face models not appearing? It was just, like, eyeballs and stuff. It's like, this is not something that is just a recent development with the studio that's kinda going down the ship a little bit. It's like, no, this is a thing that's been happening well over a decade. They've had to apologize to their fans, to their stockholders regularly, right? It's just they're trying to take a cheap shot at Star Wars, right? And yes, plenty of people do and succeed, but in this case, it's like, no, man, like there's a lot of different factors here you got to consider, and the fact that you are admitting like we had to keep polishing and fixing up the mechanics of the game, and have like on your YouTube channel like a patch update from your team being like, oh, this, and this, right? And I get it. There are certain things that we know that the like Lucas Games kind of does limit about, like, different things that they can do with the IP. Like, for example, like, when we're talking about Battlefront 2, I believe they actually wanted to have the ships, that from ground to air, but for some reason, EA was just told by, like, the Star Wars shareholders, "No, we don't want that. We're not gonna do that." And it's like, "What? Okay." So I'm not saying that, Lucasfilm Games and everybody are perfect, no, right? Like, they were literally created because of EA just kinda doing whatever they wanted and all. That being said, these are things that have been identified as constant issues from 10 plus years for the Ubisoft studio with their flagship, right? It's not like Star Wars is their flagship and it's suddenly gone down. Like, this is your first real attempt. And instead of giving your best shot or delaying, like we've seen Survivor do, and still continue to be like, yeah, we know there's some technical issues, but this is the only way we can do it. There was no real sort of like discussion about it. Just like it's being dumped in August. Here's a cool little marketing video, here's some ads, here's just some little promo, bam, right? And then when it wasn't selling well, you're like, "Oh, okay, gotta do this, okay, cut the
Yeah.
cost here for Black." It's like, no, like you were showing a whole pattern of not believing in the product, trying to save face, get a Game of the Year edition or like, a holiday edition version to start making your kinda go up. And then even after all that, you're like, "Yeah, it did go up, just not as much as we wanted." Oh, what does that tell you? It's not the brand, it's you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I think Unity is a good point because even though that was 10 years ago, Ubisoft has been one of the forebearers, really, of this pattern that's plagued the video game industry of let's release what we have now and then we'll fix it later. And it happens every year to at least a dozen games that people have been looking forward to. And it doesn't make it right, but it's one of those things that just now like accepted in the video game space, and we shouldn't really accept it. I mean, there's plenty of creators and people out there who fight back against this, but the average person doesn't really know that. They're not as plugged into the gaming space, and so it's a trend, and you've seen this trend basically since the PS4, Xbox One generation, which gave these publishers the ability to retroactively fix their stuff. And so Ubisoft, it's not a coincidence that most of Ubisoft's great games all came out in an era where they couldn't fix it on the Xbox 360 and the PS3. And then we get into PS4 and Xbox One generation, and they haven't been able to release the same consistent amount of quality titles, even with their flagship properties. Like they started out that generation with a bang with Assassin's Creed 4, and then since then, there hasn't been Assassin's Creed that's really lived up to that level. And Odyssey is there for a lot of people, but it's not that traditional Assassin's Creed. They had to like completely reinvent the Assassin's Creed formula just to make it viable again because people completely lost faith in it. So yeah, I think it's really on them. This is really just laughable at this point. So the connection here with Star Wars, and um if you really want to blame Star Wars, then I think it really has to be a twofold thing. Like both properties may have been at a low point at this point because Skull and Bone. I mean, a lot of people, you can't really discount the failure that was Skull and Bones. Like that was an absolute disaster.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
to have this on top of that, which I think they were putting more stock into this game than normal because they were hoping this would save their 2024, and it didn't. It just kind of made it worse. So we have a few more comments. We have Skywalker's Academy says Star Wars has always had its problems. If people have a problem with it, then that's their problem. I'm not a gamer, so I don't care. I was hoping the story was good. I followed Jedi Fallen Order and Survivor, and they were good. Kay didn't seem to have a story other than doing scoundrel things. And I'm with you, Skywalker's Academy. I mean, I think Kay is a fine character, but she's not. She's just Han Solo light. She's Lando light. We've seen this character 50 times before, and so kind of difficult to do this type of character and then expect all of us to care about a character like this, and then not even really give her her own unique skill set that like makes her a little bit different from Lando or Han. She literally dresses like them both. She does the same stuff. She's got her droid friend. She just it's the same thing. And so really they're just copying Star Wars tropes and hoping that people like it because they like Star Wars tropes, when instead they could have said, okay, we've got the scoundrel character Kay Vest, but she's destined to be so much more, and she's going to find this armor or find this gun or find whatever and actually become an important member of Star Wars. But instead it's just like, no, she's just your scoundrel you've seen a million times. So I'm with you, Skywalker's Academy. I think your point is a very valid one for why this game didn't do well, is because you, as somebody who doesn't consider yourself a gamer, looks in on the outside and says, well, what's compelling about this narrative? If I'm playing the game for the narrative, what's compelling about this narrative or this character? And then on top of that, you're not hearing great things about the game overall. So why would you buy it? I think that's a valid point and always a worthwhile one to hear from people who aren't considering themselves gamers or plugged into the gaming space.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with all those points for sure. And it's like you said, Liam, she is a character that isn't necessarily fresh or new, right? Like she is very much pulling from the different tropes of gaming and what we've already established with much more famous and older characters in Star Wars. That being said, she does have some great interactions with a lot of these characters. I did like a lot of her stuff with Lando. I love her stuff with Nix all the time, the care that she shows there. She has like some stuff with her mother that could have been really interesting, but it's so spread out as a concept throughout the game that you're like, what does that really do and affect her, right? And, like, obviously, I did like a lot of her stuff with Hondo, like, I mean, she plays well off of other characters. She's just not very original or unique, and if this game was just called Star Wars Scoundrels instead of Star Wars Outlaws, I think it makes a lot more sense because she is more of a scoundrel than an outlaw. There's nothing about her that's like, she's prohibited, she's like there's a little bit of her story being, like, being on the run because of what she's stolen, but that's not necessarily any different than what we've gotten from all these other characters who've had periods with life where they are outlaws. They are like street rats and stuff like that. I don't really get to see that, and I know part of it is also because of the setting of Canto Bight being like a very rich planet and kind of living in the underbelly of that. But we've seen in the comics characters like Lucky and all that who have had some very interesting storylines of their own lives and how their partnership in the time world has actually changed and affected them, what has been part of their origin, what has become who they are, who they interact and bounce off of. Nothing wrong with Kay as a character. I really do enjoy her. I just there needs to be more. She needs to grow, and she needed more time to grow in her own base story. That's probably gonna be one of the biggest limiting factors for her appeal moving forward. I do want her to show up in more multimedia, but this is probably a one and done game, right? Like, even the way they marketed the season pass from the start was like Lando and Hondo, like these are big name characters, as opposed to like this is a cool story quest planet ship or something that you're gonna be dealing with. It's like more, hey, here's this character that you love and adore, and Kay's gonna be with them, right? Like that's how little trust you have in your own writing and in your promotion there, especially when there are very solid pieces of the character. I don't know. It's a bit of a shame.
And I think that goes back to another point too that's we've seen reiterated over and over and over again when it comes to cross media type of experiences, whether it's a video game into a movie or a video game into a show or a movie into a video game, right? You have to capture the spirit of what people love about those things. And so when it comes to Star Wars, since it's a movie first franchise and TV second franchise, and then everything else is kind of debatably next, you kind of have to deliver on the story because the story is what a lot of people are there for. Sure, certain games like Battlefront or Squadrons and stuff like that, people are there for living the Star Wars experience. But in a or in a single player game, you're there for the story. And even somebody like Skywalker's Academy is saying they aren't a gamer, but they'll give it a shot if the story's great.
Yeah.
And they didn't deliver on that part. It was just a generic story. And so I think that's a big one that ultimately, when you look at Star Wars games in the future, one of the reasons Survivor and Fallen Order was a huge success is because they made Cal Kestis compelling and the people around Cal Kestis compelling. And that was the first step. And then after that, they delivered an excellent gaming experience. But you can play Fallen Order, and it feels like other video games you might have played, but it doesn't feel like other Star Wars video games you played. I think those are big keys. So hopefully they learn from this in the future. I mean, I don't see Ubisoft making a new game for a while for Star Wars, but we will probably see more Star Wars open world games, and hopefully they're much better than this. F16 says hopefully Star Wars Eclipse comes out within the next 20 years. And then
Oh boy.
Skywalker's Academy says Star Wars Eclipse 2047. That might be even a bold prediction. 20 years. I don't know
Yeah,
if that
that
game's ever happening.
that was always a lie. Like everything about it was a lie. They made a whole trailer just to be like, "Oh yeah, we got something here." Just I know. Like I think the last major thing that came from that studio was Detroit Become Human or something, and that was a while
Yeah,
back now too. And there is a lot of, let's say, mixed baggage at best around the CEO. So, yeah, not a great partnership. I don't know why that was ever something that was, like, considered, but, yeah, and it also just never really seemed like a super great formula because like, games like Heavy Rain and Detroit Become Human are not very, like, action oriented. Like, even at a base level, even if you're not, like, a gamer, I think Star Wars has always had a more of an action tangent for, like, as a basic entry point for a lot of their games, right? I think RTSs and all that, like, are a little bit more of the hardcore gamers, but the games like Heavy Rain and all that, those are just, like, dialogue branches. There's very little. It's watching, like, like those old, like, animation books where it was like they take an episode of a TV show and then put, like, different clips of it and then copy paste it in the book. You're like, "Great. I'd rather just watch the thing, right, as opposed to playing through it." So, I know those games are fairly well received and they have their big fans. It's just not something I thought was ever gonna be, like, a great model for Star Wars to jump into personally. So, yeah, I don't know. Quantic Dream can say whatever they want, Skywars Academy. It's yeah, they can say all that, but it's like the same thing as until like recently, Rian Johnson being like, "Oh, I wanna come back to Star Wars, I wanna come back to Star Wars," and then now he's saying, we had some like ideas that we're throwing back and forth with each other," right? After like
yeah.
a decade essentially of saying like there was something, there was like almost near a treatment or something like that. So they can say what they want. They don't have the best reputation amongst even other studios in the gaming industry. And, we've talked this whole stream about developers kind of blaming Star Wars. Like, I mean, you can even look at Respawn's CEO when Fallen Order is coming out. They're like, "Yeah, we didn't really want to do this like single player. We just don't expect it to really sell a lot of games. Honestly, it's probably going to do less than we expect." Like, already trash talking like a game associated with the Star Wars brand because they're like, "Oh, live service games are going to do better." And then it blew past expectations, and suddenly they changed their tune. Right? Quantic Dream's in the same boat as everything that we're seeing from Ubisoft, right? They can criticize the brand eventually and be like, "Oh, it's so hard to work or it's just expensive." But at the end of the day, like, you have to deliver something that talking to people outside of just the regular Star Wars fandom, like, "Oh, I wanna check it out." Once they get to check it out, then you start getting Game of the Year contenders like Fallen Order and Survivor because there is actually fundamentally a great game there, right? It doesn't matter if you love the brand or not. You're like, "Well, this is really fun to put my hands on," right? Like, that's not the case here with Outlaws for a lot of people, and I really doubt there would be with the formula that Quantic Dream plays with for a lot of Star Wars fans. They'd be like, "I'd rather just watch the whole thing in cutscenes online anyways."
Well, and from Star Wars perspective as well, like when you team up with a video game publisher to make a video game, you're hoping for return on video game fans into Star Wars fans, just the
Yeah.
same way the video game publisher is hoping for Star Wars fans to become video game fans. Like it's a mutually beneficial relationship. And so what does Star Wars really have to gain from something that, like an Outlaws? Like if it's going to fall flat, it just only further tarnishes the Star Wars brand. It doesn't bring new video game fans over to Star Wars. They go, okay, maybe that's somebody's first Star Wars experience. Like, okay, what does this have to do with, I don't really like Star Wars if this is what this universe is like. And same with Eclipse. If Eclipse can't get it right, if there's a lot of baggage beyond there, what benefit does Star Wars really have from kind of a niche style video game unless it's going to win over a bunch of gamers who might not have tried Star Wars before, right? So, but just in Eclipse news, well, not news, but I looked it up, and they still do have a website live. So it is still a thing that is up on the internet. And I mean, Skywalker's Academy, I'm kind of like, I don't think they've officially canceled it, but like you're saying, something. I mean, the Rian Johnson thing too. None of us bought that they were actively working on it. It's something that maybe it'll happen one day. This will be like one of those stories of a game that gets announced, in 2005 and then comes out in 2030. Like it's one of those things that people just thought was completely dead, but they never fully left it off the ground. And we've seen great versions of that. Like Metroid Dread was a game that was announced forever ago, and it was great when it finally came out. We've also seen versions of it that have fallen completely flat. Like I believe Skull and Bone was announced a long time ago, and that fell completely flat. So yeah, it's not necessarily promising for Eclipse. But yeah, let's move on to a few of your guys' questions, and then we'll move on to some of our next topics here. So we'll start at the top, and again, send in as many chat questions as you'd like. First come, first serve. But if you send in a super chat, you get bumped up to the top. We'll answer yours instantly. You can also join our Patreon or YouTube membership programs. If you have a certain tier, you will get priority chat access. So make sure you check those out as well. We have a lot more people watching right now than have liked the stream. So please like the stream. It really helps us out, and it's very much so beneficial for our channel. And it's very easy to do. Just hit that like button. All right, let's get into the first question we have up here after Brandon's Outlaws question. And Brandon says, since David Cornsweet's newest Superman is a Star Wars fan, could you see him play a role in a future Star Wars show or movie? Absolutely. I mean, I think Star Wars is, any movie franchise is interested in an actor who's hot right now, and he's very popular. He has a lot of charisma. I think that's something that, obviously you don't know. Certain actors play small parts in a lot of things, like David Cornsweet, and then he gets this gigantic role, and you see a million interviews out there with him, and you really realize that he's got out of chemistry himself. It's not just him playing Superman. And so I think when you have that type of charisma just right off the bat, you instantly become somebody that studios are looking at because you can sell their property. Like how many interviews and memes and things have I seen with David Cornsweet? He's a good sport about a lot of things. He's out there talking about Superman. He's out there talking about Star Wars. He's out there talking about and playing games on all these live shows and all this stuff. Like he's seems like a good dude. He's in his first wake of stardom, so maybe he'll get tired of it eventually. Most of them do, I'm assuming, but we'll see. David Cornsweet has been actively talking about playing characters in Star Wars. He said he wanted to play an X-wing pilot the most out of anything. He seems like a guy who's mostly into the 6 movies. I think from a lot of the comments I've seen, I think his original trilogy is his favorite, but he still seems like a pretty big fan of the prequels. He's talked about how he had a crush on Natalie Portman as a kid. So he's given a lot of stuff about Star Wars. They've asked him a lot of Star Wars questions. I think he could absolutely be in a Star Wars movie or show. And right now, he's incredibly popular, so might as well strike while the iron's hot. Does Star Wars have the ability to make you less popular? Absolutely. But I think with his continued role as Superman, and what he could do in Star Wars if they wanted to bring him in, he could absolutely play a really key role in maybe their future.
I mean, it's pretty clear that Star Wars is trying to kinda get some of these, like, breakout stars to come, right? Like, we know Mikey Madison was offered the role of the villain that Mia Goth got for the Gosling Starfighter film, right? So, it's very clear they are kinda getting these actors that aren't necessarily, like, A tier, S tier, triple ace level, like, top of the top stars yet. Like, they are the ones that are rising, that have just had their first real taste of fandom that is past just like, "Oh, I like some of their supporting bits." Like, no, like, now they're like, they will be offered leading roles moving forward, right? So, it's not like before where we saw the start of the sequel trilogy, which again, still a super wise decision to go for upcoming stars, right? And then having a little bit more of the villains be a little bit more of like the experienced faces, right? It seems like they're actually leaning more heavily into that. I mean, that's what DC is doing, right? It seems like they're trying to go for a lot of these television breakout stars, like smaller movie breakout stars. and as their heroes, or then go for like more the established listers to be the villains, right? It's an economic choice, especially with the state of the film industry and streaming bubble being exploded. It's smart move. It's a smart move. There's more content than ever, so go and look around, and you'll find plenty of great acting, plenty of great execution all around, even if it doesn't have the same budget as like a big franchise, like we would have expected in the early to mid 2010s. So I think Cornswit, yeah, he is going to definitely be approached. I think Star Wars is going to strike while the iron is hot. I don't know if he necessarily wants to do that, but I think there is a nice little balance that DC is doing of like Superman will probably appear in another movie as almost like the secondary hero instead of a direct like Superman 2. Like he's gonna have a little I mean, DC is known for so many team up movies in general and team up comics. It's just a choice to actually bring that strategy now into, the films themselves, especially with how we've seen Marvel kind of struggle to get, like, these younger characters popping up, and, like, taking over for older mantle figures. You can do this here where you're like, "Yeah, I'm not necessarily gonna give you and promise a sequel right away, but I can build out the world, have Superman be in the world." And what does that mean for David? He probably isn't on set for, like, 3 months. He might probably is only on set for 1 month and gets most of his scenes done, alright? And then you could have him play a bigger role in a Star Wars film if he really wants to. Right? X-Wing pilot, I think yes, I've seen the video of him doing the whole Death Star trench run, like, it's fantastic, right? He's a super fan, without a doubt, right? And I also saw that interview where he's talked about the 6 Star Wars films, that it was just so snappy that there was, like, no chance to even, like, say, like, "Oh, does he hate the sequels or something?" No, and he's not that type of guy, he's chronically offline from what I can tell, like, even some of the promotion for, like, Superman, he was with Rachel Brosnahan, and they had to, like, explain, like, TikTok terms and, like, slang, because there's, like, one joke about, like, the square root of 64 is 8, and, like, when we say someone's, like, 8 with their outfit, it means, like, "Wow, that's such a great outfit, you look incredible in it," and he's like, "No, that's so mean, you're it's a 10," right? Like, this is a dude who probably doesn't even get affected by the media like a traditional Star Wars actor would have, right? Especially the sequel actors when that's when social media was really hitting its peak for a lot of people, and it was like everything was super connected and dialed in. He seems like a great choice for, like, not only being a lower budget star at this point, yeah, more buying power than he probably did before Superman came out, but still not demanding, like, a $5 to $10 million salary, not right away. And with the role that he kinda wants to do in X-Wing pilot, it's a shame because the dude's 6'5", but there isn't gonna be a lot that he's gonna be offered to do other than, like, react and hit a couple knobs and all that, unless, they do something like Rogue Squadron, go straight where he's actually, walking around, talking espionage, stuff like that, right? So, I'd love for him to be a big fan. We need to have some of these, you know, people who capture, like, global audience's attention and just for who they are and bring them to the Star Wars brand. I still do think it is right to go for relative unknowns for everything, and he does kind of thread that line, but with the state of, like, the post-sequel era, like, still being really undefined, you still need to go now for names that have, like, a little bit of weight and sway, and he's right at that cusp of it. I think he'd be a great choice. I know he also had, like, a lie detector test with Nicholas Hoult where he was like, would you rather be Superman for the rest of your life or Jedi Knight? And he went with Jedi Knight. I think he'd be a great Jedi Knight, especially if they do something in, like, the Old Republic. He'd be like a Jedi Guardian. He has the physique for it, he has the look for it, he'd be strong, charismatic, everything, right? So, I'd love for him to, like, also be able to carve out some of his own space in Star Wars with the fact that the dude is just huge in general. Like, I just don't wanna
Mhm.
stuff him into a coffin as much as he wants it because that's a waste of his frame.
I agree. I would love to see him do something a little more physical, but we'll see. I would be happy to have him in Star Wars. I like that Star Wars is going for some more names right now. I mean, like you said, it's always nice to have these unknowns come in and really take off. I mean, even like B or C list actors, right? I mean, we talk about there's so many memes right now about Pedro Pascal and everything he's been in, but it is the Mandalorian that kickstarted his
Yeah.
career into this level. He wasn't there from Game of Thrones. He was still doing bit parts. He was still doing small roles. He was still playing, the villain in Kingsman 2. Like he was doing these smaller things. And then Mandalorian comes around, and it's funny because it's a role where he wasn't even really as involved as his face would indicate. Um, and now he's Joel in The Last of Us, and then he's uh, in the Fantastic Four playing Reed Richards, and he's going to be leading the Avengers movies next. Like all this stuff, and so Star Wars can do that for you, can take you to that next level. Um, I mean, Superman probably already has for David, but we'll see. We'll see. I'd love to see him in Star Wars at some point. Brandon then asks for future Star Wars like Maul, Shadow Lord. Do you think it will be a time gap? Darth Maul ran his crime syndicate, Crimson Dawn, similar to Shadow Collective between Clone Wars 7 and Solo. So you're asking, will there be a time jump between Maul, Shadow Lord, and Clone Wars Season 7? I would imagine there is some form of time jump because I think it's going to take place after the Bad Batch, but I don't think it's going to be significant. I still think it's going to take place a lot closer to uh, Revenge of the Sith, end of Clone Wars, than it would Solo. And hopefully, if the show can go long enough, it can creep there and we can get to Solo. And maybe one day it could be our post Solo show that connects Maul to where he is in Rebels. But I think it's going to take place closer to the Bad Batch. Maybe, if not crossing over with the Bad Batch, I think right after, because I think they're, even though these shows aren't necessarily interconnected right now in the animation world, I think they would like to continue pushing through the dark times show after show and let each one kind of exist in its own period. So I imagine that most of the show will take place after the Bad Batch.
Yeah, I'm in the same, thinking as well because I'm also considering Tales of the Underworld now that we have the Ventress, like, revival kinda being explained and then her initial connection with the path, right? Yes, she doesn't actually go up to Quinlan or anything, right? And she has her little Jedi friend/student/apprentice, slash apprentice, right? Who, again, I forget his name, but he was probably one of the like, best examples of, like, writing a younger kid without being annoying and quippy like Ezra was and Ahsoka was when they first started. So I'd love to see them continue, right? I know Liam has that video about doing, like, a Clone Wars as dark time show where it's, like, different arcs for different characters. It just doesn't seem like there's much interest for them to go for something that massive anymore, which is a bit of a shame, but I can understand, especially with streaming budgets. Animation probably also is one of the first things that gets cut too. So kind of keeping things focused, keeping it on like a figure that we know is super well established that has really earned an extra level of infamy thanks to his appearances in Clone Wars, to his appearance in Rebels, right? Yeah, might as well finish up like the whole Maul stuff, right? And I think there will be a small gap. I think it'll be set a bit after Underworld, just so that you can have him kind of like naturally reset a bit as a character, from where we've seen him last at the end of the Siege of Mandalore arc after his escape from Ahsoka and the Minotaur crashing down. But, the rumors of, like, that Twilight kinda being the Dark Talon and all that, I do wonder how far they wanna push into the future because is she a character that they have an intention of, like, surviving past the not just the Dark Times, but past the original trilogy, kinda doing, like, what Lucas wanted to do with his original plans for, that Darth Maul game and then sequel trilogy of having Maul somehow alive with Dark Talon, who's, originally from the legacy 200 plus years after A New Hope stories, right? So I'm very curious what they're really trying to do, if she's talent inspired or if she's actually talent per se, right? That's gonna be a big reason for where the placement of this will really exist for me. I don't know how much we wanna really have Inquisitors crossover per se. I know we've had some in Underworld and all that, but will they be chasing Maul right away, or is that something that more towards the end of the story when seemingly him and Talon aren't together anymore and he's then trapped on Malachor? Is she the reason why that she's trapped on Malachor? We know at some point Vader and him had some sort of confrontation too because he is quite fearful of him when, he's, mentioned and brought up during the season 2 finale, right? So there's a lot of, like, pieces pulling around just the character that makes me go like, I'm not really exactly sure the placement. I wanna say it's actually a bit deeper into the timeline to, connect those things a little bit more simply and not have to do, like, another show, another major appearance. But then at the same time, the Shadow Collective does naturally segue into Crimson Dawn. We do see, uh, Dryden Voss quite literally appear in like, the animation for Siege of Mandalore, and he is obviously part of Crimson Dawn. He is the second command, presumably under Maul at this time. Is this gonna be something that, you know, is gonna grow slowly without him, with him? I'm not really sure. It's gonna be pretty interesting, but kinda going for this whole Shadow Lord thing, I would assume he's gonna be working on this very delicate balance between, am I gonna go for someone who could potentially replace Savage and get my revenge for the upteen time, while also, like, being smart enough to be like, I can't just rely on that and have it all integrated. I might have to keep it separate so Palpatine doesn't destroy me and my whole organization, my whole way of living again like he did in season 5 and how the Jedi did in season 7. So, it's gonna be a very delicate thread, and I think that's why I wanna stay a little bit more, like, 6, 7, 8 years after, everything we see in Revenge of the Sith. It gives enough time for, like, things to still be fleshed out for all these characters with the path, with the Bad Batch to have continuing stories and all that, while still allowing Maul to kinda, carve out his own little space in the increasingly crowded Dark Times era.
Yeah. And I mean, I think treating the first 10 years of the Dark Times too, kind of like these stepping stones to the ultimate reign of the Empire, right? Because the Bad Batch really establishes that the Empire is still figuring it out militarily. Like
Yeah.
it's still trying to figure out the transition from clones to stormtroopers, the TK troopers, the science behind it all with Tantus, all that type of stuff. It's really establishing that ground. If Maul Shadow Lord could establish what the crime syndicates are doing and the upheaval and the changes between the Clone Wars and the different factions that were fighting in the Clone Wars between the CIS and the Republic, and the rules for different crime groups underneath the CIS versus underneath the Republic, and the way they were allowed to kind of carve out different, lanes and avenues for themselves. I mean, we have a whole movie about both trying to vie for power with Jabba the Hutt to use his shipment lanes to control their supplies during the war. I mean, what's it like for the crime syndicates post the Revenge of the Sith, and how does that all change? So, if Maul Shadow Lord could solidify that, then maybe one day we can actually get into all the factions and start showing those glimpses of everything. But it would be interesting if they use this like immediate 2 to 5 years after Revenge of the Sith really establish what the Empire, how the Empire deals with the crime lords, how do they attack them, and do they crack down, do they use them more like we see in the original trilogy where they're using them far more, working with them far more, or do they actively go after them, and maybe it is somebody like a Maul who kind of carves out and makes a name for the crime lords themselves and are like, no, we're the ones who are going to dictate the terms of our deals between you and us, and you're not going to control us completely. Because I would imagine the way we see, the Bad Batch, everything about the Empire, them trying to crack down immediately on everything, just tightening their grip so much compared to what the Republic had. I think it would be interesting to see that pull between the crime syndicates and the Empire immediately in the wakes of Revenge of the Sith. So we'll see if that's the case. But thanks for that question, Brandon. Again, there are a lot of people watching tonight's stream that have not liked the video. So make sure you like the video. It really helps us out. And subscribe if you are new. Send in your questions, your comments, anything you'd like to in the chat, and we'll try to get to them during tonight's stream. Our next question here is also from Brandon, who says, do you think George Lucas at San Diego Comic-Con could reveal some concept arts from the original trilogy, prequels, and Clone Wars? And will they be displayed at Lucas Museum of Narrative Art in Los Angeles and California? I think we're going to go get a lot of cool behind the scenes stuff from George. Maybe not necessarily at Comic-Con. I'm sure he'll show a few things because he's going to want to entice people to come to the museum. The whole point is selling his museum. But I think this will be probably our biggest look behind the scenes ever at what at least his part in the creation of Star Wars. Like, I think we'll get a lot more early Star Wars stuff. Maybe not necessarily stuff directly involved with the individual films during their production and stuff, because again, that's still kind of up to Disney. They own it all. So the concept art, all of that is owned by Disney now. So he doesn't necessarily have access to all of that, but something like his original scripts or his original outlines or notes and stuff like that, some of the early days stuff that was precursors to Star Wars, I think you'll see some of that type of stuff. And I'm sure he's going to work with Disney to get the pieces he needs for the museum. Obviously, them being donors or something could pay dividends for them, and reconnecting with some Star Wars fans and different types of stuff like that. There's benefits for them as well. And he is if not one of the single biggest shareholders of Disney. So he has a lot of sway over the company as well. So he can kind of say, hey, maybe you guys should give us some stuff from our museum. So we'll see some stuff. I mean, Star Wars is obviously the big selling point of the museum, considering it is the George Lucas Museum. Even if he's framing it as a museum for all of narrative art, it's going to be known as the George Lucas Museum, and people are going to go expecting to see Star Wars and Indiana Jones stuff. So I'm sure they'll have a very big collection of that we've never seen before from those films.
Yeah, I have the same sort of thoughts. It would be just stuff that, more of like Lucas's direct work without people's like, I mean, anything around filmmaking is collaborative, right? So at the end of the day, what is the thing that's gonna start off like mostly personal and to you, the very earliest of the writing that you've done, right? So I think that's where we might get seasons of that, of everything that he's worked on Star Wars, because we know he had some ideas for Clone Wars. I'd love to see stuff like for Underworld and all that, like, if he has the option of showing
Yeah,
it. Um, I do think it'll be a lot more stuff to do with, like, his creations and his business too, like, people forget Pixar is not a Disney company to start off with. It was owned previously by Apple, and then before Apple, it was created under ILM, right? So, he's been at the forefront of all narrative media, essentially for the last 50 years when we talk about it, right? So I'd love to see some of his initial discussions, dialogues, emails, and stuff like that, just like the creation of these concepts, I think would be amazing to see. And it's a bit harder too, like Liam said, not just because of the rights that we've gotten kind of fully being consolidated under Disney, even if he is a major stakeholder. It's also the fact that Star Wars has already covered a lot of this stuff, right? It's insane to think about, but it's probably really the best maintained of, like, these older 20th century franchises, right? Like, we know that there's a lot of things from, like, old Doctor Who and everything, costumes that are used for, like, Bossk and all that, and there's some connective tissue between different studios using a lot of old costumes and landscapes and all that between different franchises and movies and all that. Star Wars did that, created its own thing and then kept it in-house. They didn't really just, like, license it off because it's independent, right? Lucasfilm was independent. It was a kid kinda just standing up against the whole industry, right? Like, he hated part of like, one of the biggest reasons why they stayed independent is because he didn't wanna put the credits for the actors before the movie started. He wanted to do it afterwards for his opening crawl, right? And they did not like that at all. So, he's always been the rebel. He is the true outlaw when it comes to a lot of even amongst his contemporaries, amongst the blockbuster era of filmmaking that began with him, Spielberg, and Coppola, and all that, right? So, I'd love to see just his thoughts, his dialogues, his conversations, how that was recorded, but a lot of that stuff is already shown. So, I do wonder how much he can really tease and show. I feel like it'd be a lot of initial conversations between seasons of shows and all that he's gonna be able to, like, give some more insight to because that's not necessarily super exciting for the average Star Wars fan, but for someone looking for narrative art, for seeing how, like, a franchise has grown, an IP has grown, how a mythology is created, right? He is arguably the closest thing to Tolkien, right? It's just he's done so much of this. He's had input on stuff that he disregarded, like, stuff like we've seen with New Jedi Order and all that, like, when he pushes and pulls, right? I'd love to see a little bit more of that in the history of the franchise. But when he actually stepped in place, I'd love for him to actually be able to give some good pinpoints because that's probably where we as a fandom don't really know exactly. There's always a little bit of contradictory information. This is the first time he can really say, like, this is how involved I was in 1995 with Star Wars, how involved I was with Star Wars in
yeah,
2003 between Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, and 1988 or something. Like, these are things that we've let other people in the internet kinda shape our opinions about, including ourselves, don't get us wrong, and whatever we've seen in released documentaries and behind the scenes footage, but the words of the man himself have not really always been shown, and I'd love to see that be kinda used at Comic-Con along with concept art, along with stuff we've never seen for sure. But, like, teases about, like, "You come to the museum, you will get every year covered in detail about everything I've ever worked on," right? There's a whole era between, like, American Graffiti and Star Wars that I wanna know, like, what was he thinking? What other ideas was he throwing out, right? Like, there was so much about this guy that wanted to be an indie filmmaker, an experimental filmmaker, and then he just happened to make Star Wars, and Star Wars took over his life, whether or not he wanted it to. So, I'd really love to see just his thoughts on everything, between every single era and the eras that we don't really get to think about or see about because Star Wars was not pumping out as much at that point in time.
Yeah, and there needs to be like an ILM room as well. Like, I think he's going to go in on all of this type of stuff, and I think a lot of that would be really cool. Like, yeah, maybe some early pitches or outlines with like Zahn or something would be pretty neat. I don't know if that's the most attractive thing to sell your museum in LA about, but it would be very cool to Star Wars fans. And so, like, I think a lot of that Star Wars history would be really neat. Obviously, I'm interested in hearing what his thoughts are because obviously Star Wars and Indiana Jones are the two things that would sell the museum. But like you said, he's always been a rebel. Is this something that he's just like, no, I want this to be a non-Star Wars museum? Like,
Yeah.
Star Wars will have a little room, but it's going to focus on the history of narrative art. And it's like, man, that would be a bold decision because I think most people are coming to see the Star Wars stuff. So I would make it, at least 25-30% Star Wars, and then you could have 70% for everything else. But it's a huge museum. Hopefully there's some stuff there for all of us Star Wars fans. But yeah, thanks for that question. Brandon also asked, last question is, could Fantastic Four First Steps make a tribute to the original Doctor Doom actor Julian McMahon in the credits since he recently passed away? Sure, I don't see why not. Maybe in the special thanks or something. I know they did invite every actor who's ever been in Fantastic Four to that premiere the other night, including the unreleased film actors. And so who knows? You could see a shout out for him, but I don't know. I mean, most people don't know who he is, so I don't think like how like in the Last Jedi it pauses and it says in loving memory of Carrie Fisher. I don't think you're gonna have that necessarily in the credits, but it could be a special thanks or something towards the bottom, like in memory of Julian McMahon for his contributions to the character and to the role of Doctor Doom. But that also assumes that Doctor Doom's in this, which we don't know if he is or not. Because I think it would be better off saved for something he's actually in, if you wanted to do that. And I'm assuming he'll be at least an end credit scene or in some form of the ending because they're going to have to tease Avengers Doomsday. But I don't think he's playing a huge role from everything I've heard. It's Galactus's movie as the villain. So we shall see what it comes to when it comes to Doctor Doom's appearances.
Yeah. I mean, technically, he's not even the original because there's a 1994 bootleg film that they did for the rights alone that's actually gotten a lot more recognition since I believe there's, like, a cameo of the original actors in the new Fantastic Four film, that was leaked in Kevin Feige conversation of all things. So yeah, I mean, I know people have kind of done a lot of revisionism around the films and been like, "Oh, no, those early Fox films are so great." You look at their ratings, they are god awful, they misunderstand the characterizations of everything, and it kinda sucks to say, but McMahon seemed like he was actually gonna be a great Doom, it's just he was failed by the writing. He was failed by, like, everything kinda being congested and crammed together and not really understanding the dynamic between him and Reed and all that, right? So I can see maybe they'd wanna, like, give him a little bit of a tribute, but I think the place and time to do that was probably at, like, the red carpet or I guess the blue carpet for them in this case, because like it or not, when you have a lot more of these, like, in memoriams or, like, recognition for actors who have passed away, it's usually people who've worked on the project or who've been, like, supremely influential on the project. He's not. He's, like, what they're moving past all the we've never really seen, like, how we've seen with other Fox properties, right? Like, oh, all the X-Men have showed up in some sort of cameos in Deadpool and Doctor Strange and Multiverse of Madness, right? Like, it doesn't really seem like that 2000s Fantastic Four crews besides Chris Evans, who everyone agrees is, like, the best, cast of the whole group and is truly Johnny Storm, right? But besides them, I don't think the other 3 actors have really been asked to come back in any shape or form. Even if they do, it'll be very minor. So, I wanna say that it'd be nice, but who would know and who would sadly to say care to a degree? I just don't see it unless, like, they had a role of, like, multiverse, shenanigans happening, Council of Reeds and Council of Dooms or something, and then he could cameo he was supposed to cameo there, but he doesn't, right? Or someone stands in his place, and then you could do it. but it doesn't really seem like first steps, especially with it not being part of the main MCU universe, to start off with. It doesn't really seem like there's a place for him to really have, like, any sort of real purpose or recognition, so, no, I'm sure that they will do something, like, just on, like, these red carpets and all that, and the fans have already done it, but sad to say it's old news already.
Yeah, it is, and it's unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, I think if you get any reference to him, it will be in the Doctor Doom movie. So maybe Avengers, Doomsday one day. Thanks for that question. Permafrost says 2 weeks ago we were talking about why Marvel doesn't print the right Omnis for Star Wars, and since then they've announced 5 new Star Wars Omnis in 2026. The Empire Volume 4, High Republic Volume 3, Legacy Volume 1, which is the most exciting one, New Republic Volume 3, and Newspaper Strips Omni. I think I know what would be first for y'all, but can y'all list the order you would rank these announcement collections? Well, for me, yeah, it's Legacy is the smartest one. I have most of Legacy already collected between singles, which I had a lot of. I have Legacy Volume 2 all in the original trades. And then I have 2/3 of the epics for Legacy. That Volume 2 has always eluded me. It's difficult to find. But yeah, and with the announcement of the omnibus, I might try to sell my Legacy epics because I've already read Legacy, and they still are worth a little bit with the omnibus coming out. Like I did the same thing for my Tales of the Jedi / Dawn of the Jedi epics. I sold mine, got a pretty good amount of money for those, then just bought the omnibus when it went on sale, and made my money back plus some more. So I like to do that type of stuff. So yeah, Legacy's number one, even though I've already read it. So it's a little less exciting to buy, but still, I think it's the smartest move for them to make. So Legacy would be one. New Republic would probably be number 2 for me. I just have the rest of them. I've been enjoying going back through those stories over the last few years. So New Republic number 2. Newspaper strips is number 3. I really enjoy getting into the newspaper strips. We haven't had them all collected in a nice Marvel omnibus before. There were some cool IDW collections that were printed in the like newspaper strip format, and that's still probably the best way to read it because you have them printed more horizontally than vertically. So I'm interested to see how they decide to print those, but I know they've been printing them in paperback for a long time. There's been epic collections for newspaper strips for years. I think they finished it. So that's probably why we're getting the omnibus, because they finished printing those epics. And they kind of like to do that and get all the epics out first and then announce omnibus because they want you to double dip. They want you to buy the paperback, and then they want you to be like, man, I really want the hardcover, so I'll upgrade and get rid of my paperbacks, or keep both. So yeah, that would be number 3 for me. And I think number 4 would be Empire, and then last would be High Republic. High Republic ones are just, it's kind of the same thing. It's like stories I just read, so it's not quite as exciting to rebuy it. So that's why it's last. And I've still yet to get any of the High Republic omnibus because it's just like, it's just hard to double dip and rebuy something you've already read and spend money on. But the Empire stuff, like the old Dark Horse stuff, is hard enough to collect again, that even if I've already read it or read most of it, it's easier to pull the trigger and rebuy it because I don't already have it on my shelf like the High Republic stuff. I have a lot of that already. But yeah, so High Republic would be last. So I'd go Legacy, New Republic, newspaper strips, Empire, and then High Republic.
Yeah, I'm not a collector myself, but if I were, I would say the only thing I'd change between Liam's list and mine would just be swapping Empire and the newspaper strips. Just, I mean, I like a little bit more of like the comics. Newspaper strips, I know it's a bit of a disservice to saying that as someone who was raised on Calvin and Hobbes, which is like one of the definitive newspaper strip comics. But when it comes to Star Wars, I'm always gonna go with a bit of a bigger hitter like Marvel or Dark Horse over, what's was already goofy in the original Marvel comic runs, but I know the newspaper ones must have been at a whole different level, weirder. I also wasn't, what's his name? The writer behind Watchmen, What's his?
Yeah, he did
Yeah,
some of the UK exclusive
yeah.
newspaper strips, which
He
if
did the
those are
UK.
part of this, that would be pretty sick.
Oh, well, if that was there, then I would have probably kept the same list. But since it seems like it's gonna be US only, probably not.
I'm gonna look that up. I'm gonna see if he is doing the newspaper strips. Were those in the epics? Because I never bought any of the epics because I already own the IDW. I own one of the two IDW hardcovers for the newspaper strips. So I don't know. I don't know Permafrost if you know if he was in the Alan Moore stories were in the epics, or if they were not. Because that would, I think they were actually in. Now that I'm thinking about it, we already got an omnibus a few years ago, and it's out of print. It would be nice for them to reprint that one. But we got a original Marvel Years UK omnibus, and I believe that the Alan Moore stuff would probably be in that because they were in like the Empire Strikes Back and Star Wars monthly/weekly magazines. So I would imagine they're there. So this would probably be mostly the US strips.
Yeah.
All right. Next question. We have Skywalker's Academy. We answered a lot of that stuff already. And so then I think it goes down to Skywalker's Academy saying RIP Ozzy Osbourne. Yeah, RIP Ozzy Osbourne. Um, I'm a pretty big, fairly big fan of Black Sabbath. I'm not going to say I'm a huge fan, but I like a lot of their songs. I listen to, 10, 15 of them regularly. His solo career, not necessarily as much did I listen to his music, but I like a good 5, 6 songs of his that I listen to often, but I have to revisit some of them because I'm a big fan of metal and classic rock and like transition early metal. So yeah, definitely a legend. RIP.
Yeah, it was at least nice that he got to actually have a final show and a final reunion with all his bandmates. He's had Parkinson's for at least a few years before his passing. So I was just seeing some clips and all that. It seems like even some of the songs that he's performing was like a self eulogy to himself. Like, this is it. I'm glad I get to do this. This is like his goodbye. And then, just a couple weeks later, he's gone.
Yeah, it's crazy the circular nature. But yeah, rest in peace, Ozzy. You will be missed. And then Skywalker's Academy. I think we already answered most of that. Reference Rian Johnson's trilogy, which we will get to that story as well. I have that one up for discussion here, and I believe we've pretty much gotten through most of the questions. So if you're somebody who's watching right now and you like to send in your question, you don't normally get a chance when we get this far into the stream. Send in your last few questions because we have a little bit of time here before we wrap up our stream tonight. So send in those last questions. If you haven't gotten that chance, make sure you hit that like button as well. A lot more people watching right now than have liked the video. And subscribe for more and join us again next week for our returned Star Wars live stream. Let's see. I think we have our next question. Gabriel Slayer 33 says, hello, lads. Can't stay because I'm at work, but wanted to say hi and wish you all well. Can't wait to check out the VOD later. Have a good one. Hey, thanks, Gabriel. We appreciate that and hope you can join later and enjoy the rest of the stream.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, let's get into a couple more topics here before we wrap up the stream tonight. And again, if you want to send in any last questions, comments, super chats, whatever you want to do, help out the channel, you can do so in the chat. This is your last chance, and we're going to wrap up here fairly soon after this. So some quick hits. We haven't done quick hits in a while. There's been a lot of stories I've saved for a while because we've had so many questions these last few streams. So let's do a few quick hits to round out the stream tonight. So first up, we have the one that's on the thumbnail, and it's that Tony Gilroy rused the lack of Andor Emmy acting noms. He said, quote, there are a lot of performances I wish were recognized, Diego Luna and Genevieve O'Reilly specifically. There are dozens of performances in the show. These aren't only great moments, or these aren't only great moment-to-moment performances. They're also epic long-term character studies that they've done over the course of 24 episodes. I think the ultimate victory is that these performances will be celebrated and discussed for years to come. I feel confident about that. And then also a little tidbit after that, he was asked if he's interested in joining Star Wars again, which he's always said, never say never. But he said that once again, I'm prepping a movie in LA next year. It's not on the menu right now, but I'll never say never. And I think that's kind of one of the fun things about Tony Gilroy's journey with Andor is he's gone from somebody who was like, one of the reasons I like making this show is because I'm not really a Star Wars fan and doing things unconventionally, to like now he actually really has loved his time working on Star Wars. And you don't hear him now ever say, well, no, Andor's it for me. Like he actually, I think, would consider coming back to Star Wars. And I hope that if he did, it's something really different from Andor. Like I'd love to see him get his feet wet in a variety of things because he can do multiple different genres. And I think he has the talent to lead an equally impressive show or film, but something tonally different from Andor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's a guy who kinda came in as a repair or fixer for 3rd act of and some of the other stuff like Cassian's introduction in Rogue One, right? I know Garrett Edwards is like, "I'm just so thankful people actually like my film," and they come up to me and don't really say anything crazy to me that they're big fans of it, but he does definitely probably tell Gilroy at least once or twice, like, "Yeah, like, you saved the film. You made it what it is. You helped it get fully realized." And now just with how Andor has been recognized despite such a weird schedule, despite such a huge gap between those seasons, despite not necessarily being the best name for the show, in 10 years from now, people will probably think about Andor as much, if not more than Rogue One just because of how sensational it turned out to be, right? It'll be such a great run-in for so many people to start on Andor season 1, episode 1, and end with, like, A New Hope with the destruction of the Death Star. Like, it'll be their own, like, little mini saga, and the lion's share of that will be Gilroy. So, yeah, I mean, I also understand what he's saying, like, that it'll be it'll be, like, years and years from now, people will still be talking about these performances, and he's right. People talk about, good or bad, all the performances in Star Wars for years and years and years, and usually the stuff that has good reviews tends to stay good, if not get better over time, and the stuff that doesn't have the best reviews, usually gets a little bit improved over time, like we've seen with so many characters like Hayden's Anakin, for example. So, yeah, absolutely excited for, the possibility of him coming back. I also agree, I think he needs to do something wildly different. It's cool that it seems like he's much more of, like, a proper Star Wars fan now, but again, I kinda want him to do something that's just not so grounded. Like, I'd love for him to do, like, part of the Old Republic saga, not necessarily charge for something like that massive because of the time scale and the fact that he'd have to, like, blend in magic and all these, like, hundreds of years of wars and stuff like that. Probably would instantly start falling out of love for Star Wars, right? But if he can do something that isn't so much about, like, the guerrilla warfare and all that, like, I think that'd be really cool for him. I'd like to see him kinda go with, like, establishments in Star Wars that are peaceful, that are crumbling or are changing. I'd love for him to maybe even throw his hat in the ring there for, like, that transition between the High Republic books and Acolyte and make a cool bridge there, like, there's some cool areas that I think he's already shown such great flexibility for in his filmmaking career that why not do that again for Star Wars? But at the same time, he's earned being able to just do something completely new and different. So, I would still put that above all else. And as far as why there aren't more Emmy nominations for the actors, like, yeah, it's cool that Forest Whitaker got a cool guest, nomination. Like, I'm not gonna disagree with that. He had some great his monologue is one of the best of that season. It is something that gives me chills, right? But at the same time, seeing Pedro Pascal, knowing how his character is like in the game of Joel and in the season of The Last of Us, getting a lead actor nomination over Diego Luna, yeah, that still rubs me the wrong way. And, we don't really talk politics or anything like that, but right now the media is not the trying to take big risks with some of their nominations or, like, the people they're elevating. We're seeing the Colbert Show's gonna get canceled now because they want the Skydance merger to happen, right? Maybe a show like Andor, which is inherently super political, could have, attracted the wrong attention. So maybe they didn't wanna push that and they wanted to push other shows that are a lot more drama focused, a little bit more on the daily lives of people, their workspaces, and all that. Star Wars is inherently a political brand. It's always had a lot of attention around its politics. George Lucas is very, very, very political since the '70s, since well before the '70s. Adding that in, especially with, Disney, with its old struggles right now with its franchises, maybe they just were like, "Yeah, we'll make a great show, we'll take it for what it is, release it as it is." It's not maybe the best climate for it.
Well, the last quick hit we can bring up here tonight, and again, last chance for your questions or your comments for tonight's stream, is the one that Skywalker's Academy referenced. Rian Johnson just sat down for a really long interview, and he talked a lot about Star Wars and reflected on his experience with Star Wars and a variety of different things that were in the movies, some controversial stuff, some fan stuff. But there are a couple particular passages that are interesting to read, specifically one where he talks about the rise of Skywalker, which we haven't necessarily heard his thoughts on the film or the connections other than just, good company man speak of like, no, it's good, it's great, everybody check it out, it doesn't contradict what I said or my film does and stuff like that. But he outlines his thoughts a lot more concretely, and I've always liked Rian Johnson, the person and the storyteller. I mean, Last Jedi has gone down in my rankings over the years. It's definitely sat less well with me now than the second, third, fourth time I saw it. Like the first time I saw it, it's kind of like that was a lot to take in. I got to see it again. Then after that, started to really enjoy the film, and then started to fall off a little bit more. But I still have an overall fairly positive to mixed positive view of the movie. And when it came to Rise of Skywalker, it was kind of a less ceremonious honeymoon period for that movie. I started to dislike it a lot faster than I started to dislike parts of the Last Jedi. And I think Rian Johnson, just in general, he's somebody who tried really hard with his movie, and I think that's always something I will always credit him for and always appreciate about Rian Johnson as a filmmaker and as a person. Is you might disagree with his decisions for the Last Jedi. I disagree with a lot of them, but he absolutely went all out and tried to make the best movie he thought he could make. So, in regards to his thoughts on the Rise of Skywalker, he says, I had a great time watching it. And again, this is all about point of view. I never approached this as like a territory I'm carving out for my thing, as in The Last Jedi. In my perspective, JJ did the same thing with the third movie that I did with the second movie, which is not digging it up and undoing it, just telling the story the way that was the most compelling going forward. That means not just validating what came before, but also recontextualizing it and evolving it and changing it as the story moves forward. I didn't feel resentful in some way, but you're talking about a movie made by my friends with my friends in it. I sit down to watch a movie and it's a Star Wars movie. It's all stuff I love, and I'm not the one to come to for a hard-hitting critique when you can go to YouTube for that. Which is I think a really fun comment. Obviously, he's playing off the criticism he's received over the years. But yeah, I think that's an interesting comment specifically about Rise of Skywalker, because he acknowledges the fact that he did very much so a similar thing with The Last Jedi to The Force Awakens, where The Force Awakens is this homage movie. It is setting up traditional Star Wars style storytelling. It does take a lot of these pieces and the epicness and the hope that you see when Rey's handing the lightsaber to Luke Skywalker. And then his movie just takes it all and is like, no, I'm going to try my best to not retcon it, but change it up and do what you're not expecting. And then The Rise of Skywalker pulls back in a different way and is like, no, well, now you're expecting what Rian set up. Now we're going to do something different. I mean, I get what he's saying, and I get it's definitely hard to critique your films, your friends' films, and your friends' work, and you're not going to be out there in statement. But I think this is as close as you'll ever get from Rian Johnson on. I don't really have any qualms with The Rise of Skywalker, because I feel I did something pretty similar with The Last Jedi to JJ's original work. And it's kind of a push and pull and just a part of the storytelling process. So I don't know, Sonic, what are your thoughts on Rian Johnson's latest comments on The Rise of Skywalker?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's always been a healthy individual, despite everything that has been thrown his way, despite a lot of the vitriol for, decisions that he made on a film that was wrapped early, wrapped under budget, right? Like, this is the smoothest Star Wars film in possibly history, at least under Disney. And it just didn't turn out exactly like how everybody wanted it to, right? I don't love to say it, but there are things that he probably should have done in a more traditional Star Wars sense, right? Like giving at least a year gap or something, right? Where it's like, oh, okay, sure, like that's all big, that's all important. And we know back in 2015, 2017, during that era when he was also offered the trilogy and all that, he did make mention of saying like, I just told JJ just kind of set up that ending to be specifically like that, right? Like, just that was my only real note for that film, right? And he was working on his script around the same time. It's not like there wasn't synergy between them. That's the funniest thing for me. Like, especially between 7 and 8, there is a lot of synergy. It's just that 9 was never intended to be JJ's again. It's
Yeah,
supposed to be the guy from
Colin
Jurassic World,
Trevorrow.
Colin Trevorrow, yeah, Trevorrow, yeah, after his Book of Ryan or something completely failed, like, and then the fact that he couldn't work around Carrie Fisher's unfortunate timing of her passing, right? And JJ came back, right? And did he probably have the same sort of conversations with JJ? No, right? And we know in Bob Iger's autobiography, Kathleen and JJ were both like, "We need 6 extra months. Like, there's no way we can make as good of a film as we can without that," right? We probably do get a bit of a longer film. We probably do get some cooler things and weirder things that get cut out and actually have time to sit in the film. We probably do get a better understanding of the state of the galaxy, get a better understanding of where Rey is. Maybe don't get that kiss, necessarily put in and have that editor kinda have a little bit more leeway there, right? Like, and have a little bit more push and say. Time makes a lot of a difference for a lot of films, and we know in the prequel era days, despite George kinda running up into the, like, day of shooting with, like, finally a draft, right? He'd love to edit his films and recreate them essentially in the edit, right? That's not something Disney's gonna necessarily do for every director on a whim, right? So, all those things kind of factor into what, Ryan is saying now, right? Yeah, why would he be mad? Like, why would he be mad, right? Like, he's like, "This is such an impossible situation that Jay-Z had to walk into," and, yeah, maybe he takes apart some things I wanna do and recontextualizes it, right? But wouldn't anybody, when they have, like, a year basically to turn it around and make this trilogy, and now knowing, a half decade past COVID, that, like, that extra 6 months wouldn't have made a difference. That would have actually been a massive shutdown, and does it get delayed again for, like, another year, right? Financially, how does that affect the film and everything, right? Like, there's so many things that you can't account for that did happen, that didn't happen, that, COVID absolutely skewed everything up, and for sure that, of course he's gonna have crazy rich friends, right? And I'll always respect that about him that, he could have become bitter after The Last Jedi. He could have just been like, "I got my franchise with Knives Out. I don't need to talk about Star Wars in any positive light," but he loves it, you know? And you don't have to love The Last Jedi, but I think you should at least love the type of guy that can still be positive, that has been known to be time for fans, is always down to have conversations like this and be positive while still showing his prowess and, his pedigree when it comes to filming. Right? And that's what Star Wars needs more and more. Even if it doesn't work out every single time, that should just be more of a case of, like, let's have a story group be more involved. Let's have a CCO like Filoni have a little bit more say and sway, right? And someone who can take over for Kathleen and actually be able to handle a little bit more of the production role and the franchise role. Don't blame the guy who, till this day, is still the nicest guy about everything that's happened to him with Star Wars and after him in Star Wars.
Well, that plays into his next comment, which is a really interesting one. And honestly, I don't know how he does it with all the hate he's received, but he says it never feels good to have anybody coming after you on the internet, especially coming after you saying things that I think I very much do not agree with about a thing that I made and put a lot of heart and soul into. But at the same time, having grown up a Star Wars fan ultimately let me contextualize it and feel at peace with it in many different ways. Just remembering going back on one level to arguing on the playground when I was a kid about Star Wars. And then I was in college when the prequels came out, and my friends and I were prequel hate central. Everyone was ruthless at that time. And of course, now the prequels are embraced. I'm not saying that as facile as, oh, things will flip around in 20 years. You'll see. But it's more of us push and pull and this hatred towards stuff that seems new in Star Wars. This is all a part of being a Star Wars fan. Culture war garbage aside, I think that is the essential part of the Star Wars healthy relationship. And I think that's really interesting. I mean, I don't know how he, keeps it like that. And I think what is good though is pulling back and being like, look, I went through this as a fan myself, hating the not me, Rian Johnson, hating the prequels. Rian Johnson saying he went through it himself, hating the prequels. And I mean, it's nice to own up to that type of thing, right? Because you can ignore that part. Like J.J. Abrams, in some ways, has kind of not necessarily in direct comments, but he's gone back on that like overt hatred of the prequels that we saw all the time leading up to The Force Awakens. And then when the prequels became fashionable in about 2017, 2018, then it was like, okay, now we're going to bring Palpatine back and have him be like prequel Palpatine. It's like, okay, and I'm not blaming JJ in any particular way, but it is this thing that like this happened. The prequel hate happened. And I think it's cool that Rian Johnson kind of owns up to that. Yeah, when I was, growing up, I was kind of part of that more toxic side of the fandom as well with my friends. And now I'm receiving it back. And so I can kind of deal with it because I know what it's like to be put off by something Star Wars. So I can understand how other people can be put off by something Star Wars. I think that's something cool that he is able to do. Obviously it takes a lot of, it's very difficult when you poured your life into something for 2-3 years, but I admire that he's trying to do so. And again, I always appreciate pretty much anything he says. He's always very thoughtful with his comments, even The Last Jedi and all.
Yeah, no, a lot of the same thoughts there. It's good that he owns up to it because it's like it is a weird thing now online and be like, I've always loved the prequels. Yeah, because you have a voice now, right? But the people who were there who came about of age during the original trilogy or like in that gap between the original trilogy and like the special editions, right? They were already complaining about the special editions, and I couldn't blame them. So there's some changes I don't love there, but they were the changes that became standardized for me as a kid, right? So am I gonna be, like, immediately toxic about it? No, but for someone who's been able to see that transition and then sees the prequels and you're like, "What is this?" Right? I get it. I absolutely get it, right? But it's again, like you said, he's so thoughtful about it. He's like, it starts off as, like, a thing that kids just do. You talk about Star Wars, "I know more about this than you, blah, blah, blah," right? And it can continue for your whole life. And, he is one of the few people who's been in the fortunate and unfortunate position of being where George Lucas was for so long, right? And now he probably looks back and he's like, "Man, maybe George should have had a little bit more help. Maybe he shouldn't been the director," right? Like, and there are stories about him reaching out to Ron Howard, reaching out to Spielberg, and both of them being like, "I don't wanna touch that at all," right? I think they get he gets absolutely can also reflect, he's no George Lucas, right? But he can be like, "Wow, the weight of that franchise, the weight of that mythology," and then trying to take big swings like George did because that would be in the true spirit of Star Wars and not having it all completely land for a lot of people. Of course, it's gonna make me bitter and all this and that, but I was also in the same boat as, like, hating George, right? He probably said some nasty things to his friends in private when he's a college kid, right, when he wasn't thinking about it like that. But now that he's in that position, now that he's out of that position too and been able to see, like, his reputation rebound with Knives Out and all that and be like, "Yeah, no, like, I can fundamentally disagree with a lot of things people have said about me, especially with all that culture war stuff, but I can also understand where they're coming from." The passion is a huge part of the Star Wars fandom. It's just so unfortunate that it has to immediately turn negative instead of, like, a nice, nuanced discussion.
Yeah, and that is the just the lifespan of Star Wars things, unfortunately. And uh, again, I don't think it'll ever change unless we can get consistent, high quality product. But it's nice that he does own up to that aspect of his life too, because I mean, we fought hard to get our prequel love out there, our generation, and now it's standardized, and there are still people who fight back against it, but their voices are definitely swallowed up by the loud prequel love. I mean, even on our channel on the polls, right? Like there was a poll the other day that was, I think, Attack the Clones versus Rebels, and Attack the Clones won by a landslide. And I was like, I don't know, I agree with that,
Yeah.
but I love Attack of the Clones too. But I don't know about being better than Rebels. But people just are in love with these movies, and I can't blame them. I was there as well, so it is nice to see that, and we hope to see that type of reclamation for the sequels. I hope for that, just for the actors and the directors and all the people around there. Will I probably ever love The Last Jedi or The Rise of Skywalker the way I love the prequels or the originals? No, because I didn't grow up with them, and they'll always be that kind of like next phase. But I hope for those people who did, and the creators around it, that they do have that reclamation at one point. And then his final quote here, the last thing we want to talk about, and the thing that's making the most headlines here, is he says, in regards to his Star Wars trilogy that was announced and people forget this, announced before The Last Jedi even came out.
Yeah.
um, they were so confident in The Last Jedi, they announced this whole trilogy to being directed by him when it was just really an idea. This is maybe the most concrete information we've ever actually gotten on it, because it sounds like it's probably not going to ever happen again. But because he's dodged it for years, saying, "Oh, I'm working on it still. Don't worry." But this time he says, "No, nothing really happened with the other trilogy. We had a great time working together, and they said let's keep doing it." And I said, "Great. I would kick ideas around with Kathy Kennedy any day." The short version is Knives Out happened. I went off and made Knives Out, and I was off to the races busy making murder mysteries. It's the sort of thing, if down the line there's an opportunity to do it or do something else in Star Wars, I would be thrilled. But right now, I'm just doing my own stuff and I'm pretty happy. So, this is to me the most concrete thing we've ever gotten, that this is in the Squadrons, Taika Waititi, Feige realm of like these things that were just thrown out there. And I mean, Squadrons was the most far along out of these, or not Squadron, Rogue Squadron. Um, but Rogue Squadron was the one that was furthest along, I think. But this whole like Taika Waititi movie, the Kevin Feige movie, and all these other things, these were just things thrown out, and they unfortunately got confirmed and leaked by massive trades. And in the Rian Johnson case, I believe this was an official Lucasfilm announcement.
Yeah.
This was the only one. This one and Rogue Squadron are official Lucasfilm announcements. I think the Taika Waititi one, I don't know if it was ever official Lucasfilm. I think they did mention a few times that he was working on a movie, but the Kevin Feige one was never like an official announcement. That was just reported by all the major trades. So there's been a lot of these unfortunate things with Star Wars, where there's these movies that are semi-announced that never actually happen. They're just in the idea phase. This is once again confirming all the suspicions we've all had for the last 8 years since The Last Jedi came out and this was announced, that this was never actually something that was getting off the ground. It was just purely in the blue sky. It was in the idea phase. And if they wanted to continue with it, they would have. But it doesn't sound like there's too much interest from Lucasfilm, or has been in the last 8 years. And Rian Johnson's got a pretty great thing going for him with Knives Out. And why would he actively pursue Star Wars again after what he's endured? So if they're not coming out to him, begging him to do it, he's kind of like, yeah, I'd do it, but Knives Out is pretty great as well. And I think he's found his niche here with this. I mean, I would love to see him do some other things, because my favorite movie of his is Looper, and I'd love to see him do more stuff like that, more original sci-fi, or even something like Brick, which is really great as well. But Knives Out is a really fun series, and I did enjoy how different he made the first one and the second one. I still prefer the first one. I'm interested to see what this third one's like tonally compared to the other two. And that, so that is at least allowing him to keep his creative juices flowing, that they're not just murder mysteries, they're all kind of different styles of murder mysteries. But I would love to see him dip his toes back into other genres at some point here. I don't want Knives Out to become his life, but he's got a pretty cool thing going with Knives Out, and can't wait to see what he does next with them.
Yeah, I thought the understanding was that Knives Out was gonna be a trilogy, but now he seems like it's open to, like, being more, and I can't blame the guy, right? Like, the amount of money that Netflix threw at him, like, the way I think they bid, like, 500 million when everybody else was like 100, 200 max, and he's like, "Oh, okay, well, why wouldn't I want this?" And we know there's been a little bit more of a, understanding with Netflix that they can at least start doing limited windows, like 10 days at certain theaters for movies, so he'll at least get some sort of theatrical release, I would think, for this 3rd one, especially a little bit more of the hype for this one compared to the last one. So, yeah, I mean, he's in a good spot. I agree, I wanna see him continue to branch out. And it I don't know, like, I can understand why he wouldn't come back to Star Wars, obviously, but it's not like he hasn't had, like, some of this before. I mean, he's been in Breaking Bad. He did Ozymandias, like, he was the director for that, right? But he also directed The Fly, I believe, in the previous season, which is, like, the most polarizing episode of the show. It's like it's a pocket episode. It says so much about, like, where that show is, where the characters are at that point, but doesn't necessarily do anything moving forward with that, right? It's just more of, like a think piece, just played out, right? So he's always done something weird and different, right? So, and he's gotten a little bit of the negative feelings from directors and all this and that, and fandoms, but Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see him come back. I'd love to see him continue fleshing out ideas. It seems like before the way people were talking about it was like active working on scripts and like whole like outlines. This is more of like ideas, which is I think the most concrete thing we've ever heard about that. Obviously, the era when this was happening was before streaming had exploded, where it's only Netflix out and about, right? And in that time, streaming has come for everybody, and so many have collapsed, and the ones that have survived are not getting into the whole world of like subscriber growth anymore. Now they're like, well, this has to be treated like TV. We have to look at revenue, right? So it's like, yeah, I mean, that whole bubble has collapsed in this whole time, and he's still been working on Knives Out. He's been kind of doing his own thing. I think he can come back. I'd love for him to come back as like a director for some episode of its good TV show or something like that. I think he's fantastic. I don't know if I want him as a both as a director and writer because I don't want him to have to shoulder all that blame. I'd like people to remember that he is a fantastic director, right? Maybe writing he might need to like pull some of his punches a little bit, take a couple less swings here for the average Star Wars fan to be able to handle. But as a director, no, I mean, even the haters of The Last Jedi can admit that there's such beauty in that film. It is the most beautiful sequel trilogy film out there. One of the best looking Disney productions from Star Wars, right? So I'd love to see him get a chance again, kind of start a little easier, right? And, especially if he does have a chance to like come into a Star Wars, remove from a political climate that probably doesn't help him with culture wars, maybe 10, 15 years down the line, and he gets to do like a whole show as a showrunner, or he gets to do like the Star Wars stories revived again and he gets to do a Star Wars story, that'd be great. But at one point, the way that they were talking about all these ideas, it was like, oh, he's gonna have his trilogy, and then there's gonna be the 5 Benioff and Weiss films that are gonna be interconnected, and like that era of Star Wars filmmaking never fully materialized. A whole replacement of it came out with streaming, and that's collapsed now. We don't know what comes next, and I think simplest thing to do is just have him come back as a director for a one-off, nothing too major, right? And I think
Hmm.
that'll be a nice palette resetter for a lot of people. And if you hate him after that, and everybody universally still likes that episode or something, I mean, that's just you. No one's gonna change your mind at that point. But if you can see and at least appreciate that he is a genuinely great director, then yeah, maybe Star Wars fans will be open to it. But why throw himself into a whole trilogy of ideas like it was announced, right? That's
Yeah.
too much. Way too much for the guy.
Well, and we'll see. I mean, I think Starfighter is really the litmus test for this whole thing.
Yeah.
Can standalone Star Wars movies work? And I don't really count Rogue One and Solo. I mean, Rogue One is more of a standalone movie, but Solo doesn't count. It's a spin-off of a main character, origin
Yeah.
story movie. And even Rogue One, it connects directly to the original trilogy. Can something that's completely unique on its own, possibly doesn't have connections, or at very least is only connected to Disney material, can that survive? Can it exist on its own and just be this fun, singular Star Wars movie? We'll see. And I think that'll be the big test because Rian Johnson would be perfect for that type of Star Wars movie. I think his ideas would mesh best in a singular style movie because that's kind of what Knives Out are. Each one is kind of its own unique thing. But that's going to wrap up our stream tonight, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. We're looking forward to Skywalker's Academy's a big question that he's teasing in the chat for a later stream. But we'll be back next week. I'll be back in my studio, so it'll look a little nicer. We'll be continuing with all the content you guys are seeing. We have videos coming out at pretty much every Monday, Friday. So keep an eye out on the channel for those shorts 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, pulls twice a day, every single day. So keep an eye out for all that great content. We're still going to be here. If you're new this week and just joining us, make sure you join us again next Tuesday for our stream. Ask your questions, your comments, anything you'd like to talk about. Doesn't even have to be Star Wars. Send it into the chat and join us next week. If you're watching on replay, do so as well. Make sure you like the video if you haven't. Again, a lot more people watching right now than have liked the stream, so please do so if you haven't. Subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. And if you're watching on replay, leave us a comment. We'll respond to you as well. Thanks so much for watching the stream, everybody, and we will see you all next week.